everybody from South France, near Carcassonne. It would be nice just to see where everybody is, because we think there'll probably be quite a few people tuning in also from the US. So just put in the chat box where you're calling from, or where you're listening from, rather, and we'll just see who we all are here, because I think there'll be some people who will have responded to Rabbi Lerner's circulation of this event as well. So we're a very wide-ranging group. I'm just looking to see other people are coming in. So I'm going to just say a few words of introduction, biographical and otherwise, to this evening's call. Then I'm going to light a candle, and having introduced Michael, and I'm going to ask Michael what he would like the candle dedicated to. So he's now got a couple of minutes to think about that. So we'll have the candle burning all evening, and then we'll send it out at the end. So you'll have maybe seen from the information we sent out that Rabbi Michael Lerner is his main platform, if you like, is the Tikkun magazine, and you can have a look at the details of that online at tikkun.org and spiritualprogressive.org. He's written 12 books, 2 of which I think I've read, The Politics of Meaning, Spirit Matters, and of course the third one is Revolutionary Love, a Political Manifesto, which I will be reviewing for the next issue of our journal. And his activism goes back a long way. As he was active in having born in 1943, he was active in the 1960s as chair of the Berkeley chapter of Students for Democratic Society. And I love this part of his description. In the 1970s, he was described by J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI, as one of the most dangerous criminals in America, although he'd never participated in any act of violence. So this is what the intelligence services have on you. And in the 80s, he earned 2 PhDs in philosophy at UC Berkeley and in social and clinical psychology, and was the principal investigator for National Institute for Mental Health, studying the psychodynamics of work and family life for middle-income working-class people. And he's been editing the Tikkun magazine since 1986, which so happens to be the exact length of time I've been editing the network journal. So snap on that one, Michael. And what he's calling for is a new form of socialism built on love, kindness, and compassion for one another. You could sum it up by saying that we propose that Rabbi Lerner proposes a method to replace what he terms capitalist globalization of selfishness with a globalization of generosity, prophetic empathy, and environmental sanity. And we'll come back to all of these themes. And so he challenges liberal and progressive forces in the US, and you'll appreciate, non-US listeners will appreciate that the situation, religious situation in the US is very, very different from what it is in Europe. To move beyond often weak-kneed and visionless politics, to build instead a movement that can reverse the environmental destructiveness and social injustice caused by the relentless pursuit of economic growth and profits. And I'm just going to read you the very first couple of sentences from the book, because I think that sets the scene extremely well. And this is the book here, Revolutionary Love. We earthlings need to build a fundamental change of consciousness in ourselves and in every part of our national and global society in order to achieve the economic and political changes necessary to prevent the destruction of the life support system of Earth, to end global and domestic poverty and wealth inequality, to defeat racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of xenophobia, to protect human rights, to achieve social, economic, and environmental justice, and to achieve a lasting global peace. This new consciousness is possible and can emerge through embracing revolutionary love, the struggle for the caring society, and a new bottom line in all our economic, political, legal, educational, and cultural institutions. This manifesto is written to show you how this can happen and how you can help make it possible. So a terrific start to the book. And I'm now going to light the candle and then we'll get going. There we are. The candle is lit. And so I'm going to begin, Michael, by just asking you what you would like to dedicate this candle to for our session this evening.
I'd like to dedicate it to all of us being able to live long enough to see major steps made in the transformation of our societies globally from selfishness and capitalist imperialism to a world based on love, kindness, and generosity.
Well, if you've got a glass in your hand, I'm sure you would drink to that. Right? So
I am. Right.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start, Michael, by asking you to tell us something about your background and the influence of mentors on your life, including Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who I understand from another bit of reading I did was a very good friend of Reinhold Niebuhr, which is an interesting, and spoke at his funeral, gave the eulogy. And then what you learned initially from your experience in the 1960s and how you arrived at the phrase spiritual progressives.
Okay, well,
So
okay, you better remind me of each one. I'll start with.
Yes.
My mentors, I mean, look, there are mentors that you get by reading them, right? But the ones that I dealt with person to person, the most influential was Abraham Joshua Heschel. When I studied at the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1960 to 64, I was mentored by him, and he was an amazing religious leader who eventually became the co-chair of the clergy and laity against the war in Vietnam. But he was also famous for having marched at Selma with Martin Luther King Jr. And in Selma was one of the places where the right wing of it at its time was doing its best to repress the civil rights movement. And they had, in the civil rights march that Martin Luther King had set up, they had attacked the through the police a lot, but also individual right-wingers and pro-segregationists. And so the King decided to call a second march, and knowing that there was real danger, and Heschel went and stood with him in that march. And so he was a great inspiration to me because he was not for pretending that he had now become a secular Jew who only cared about civil rights. He cared about a broad range of issues and about the fundamental value of affirming the goodness of humanity and the goodness of people. So he was one major influence in my life. He was a major mentor. I could say the opposite kind, namely somebody who I heard just for momentarily when I and a guy named Jerry Rubin helped create one of the first national teach-ins against the war, and we invited Isaac Deutscher to come and speak. And Deutscher gave an amazing 1.5 hour presentation about American imperialism and global imperialism. And frankly, I'd never heard anything like that before. And I thought it was amazing and fantastic. And he went through the litany of liberal beliefs. And I remember his refrain was illusion after illusion after illusion. And it stuck with me so long because those illusions still dominate the American liberal press. Forget about the conservative press, but the liberal press, and part of the liberal, the people who make up a major part of the Democratic Party. So they were. So he was, in a way, was a mentor. And then I had another one named. Let's see. Well, I'm going to stop it right now because I'm blocking the name for. But a mentor who was a religious Chassid, a Hasidic Jew, who was very, very deep in trying to transform Judaism in a way that would make it more spiritually deep. Because the truth of the matter was that at the time, this actually his name comes to me as Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalom.
Yes, indeed.
So he was my an inspiration in how to transform Judaism in a way that would make it more spiritually deep and alive. And so I was very lucky to have these people as my mentors. And of course,
one of the things that Rabbi Schachter said, I believe, was that you won't be asked why you weren't Jesus Christ or Buddha, but why you weren't Rabbi Zalman Schachter. In other words, why you weren't your unique self. Isn't that right?
Yes, I mean, although he was quoting a Hasidic master who had said that about 150 years earlier, but it was a teaching that he had, and that was very, very important.
No, it still applies. And so your experience in the 60s was really formative and with these mentors in arriving at this idea of spiritual progressives. Would that be right?
Well, it took me a long path from the 60s. I mean, by the end of the 60s, when I ended up in a federal penitentiary it started in 1970, when I was sent to the penitentiary. I was indicted by the federal government for organizing a demonstration in Seattle that had turned violent after the police had attacked us. It was a nonviolent thing until the police attacked. I don't know if you have as much of that in UK, but we have a lot of it in the United States of things that the media says, oh, their demonstration turned violent, and they never mention what happened, why that happened. So in this case, we had gone down to the federal courthouse to protest the use of the courts as an instrument to suppress dissent. And we got there, we had sent them a message saying we wanted to meet with judges and teach them about what was happening to the judiciary. Instead, the courthouse was locked, and while we were milling around trying to figure out what we wanted to do, the police suddenly arrived, but not just 5 or 10 police, but hundreds of police, and they're throwing gas at us, tear gas, and so people started to run away from the tear gas, and the cops followed them. And but anyway, in the melee at the courthouse, some rocks were thrown at the windows of the courthouse, some paint thrown on the courthouse. And so I was indicted for conspiracy to destroy federal property. Now, why conspiracy? Because I didn't do anything to destroy any federal property. I didn't throw anything. Okay. And using the facilities of interstate commerce, which in this case meant, but in my case meant the telephone, with the intent of inciting to riot. Why intent? Because I didn't incite to riot. So it had to be. Okay, so anyway, those charges were eventually, we were charged, a group of us who were involved. I was sort of the main organizer because many of the people there were my students. I was a professor of philosophy at the University of Washington at the moment. And so the group that they indicted was called the Seattle Seven, and during the trial, They had many infiltrators in our organization, many people who pretended to be us, but were really part of the FBI or working with the FBI. And this has happened all through at least the last 60 years in the United States. But one of them, in cross-examination, acknowledged that the FBI had bought the paint that was thrown at the courthouse, and that the FBI had physically brought not only the paint, but the rocks that were thrown against the courthouse window. Okay, so at that point, their case collapsed. They were in deep trouble. But the judge, on a total phony little pretext, declared a mistrial and then decided to send us to jail for contempt of court. So I ended up in and not only that, but then they saw me as J. Edgar Hoover had said, it's so dangerous that they sent me not to the federal penitentiary in Washington, in the state of Washington, but all the way down to Southern California to a federal penitentiary called Terminal Island. Okay.
That sounds ominous. Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, that experience was an amazing experience, and I learned how really there was no saving of the judicial system unless you had a rare circumstance, as I did in that case, in which the Ninth Circuit of the court was famous for being liberal. They overturned the conviction on the charge of contempt. But for the next 3 years, I was still under indictment for those original things, until another thing happened, which was that they suddenly dropped the case. It was at the time that Nixon was being investigated for the break-in in Watergate. And it turned out that the same people who had broken into Watergate had also broken into my house. At the time, I thought it was the local district U.S. attorney and his crew who were trying us. But they claimed they didn't know anything about it. We thought they were lying. But it turns out they didn't know anything about it. It was actually came from the White House itself, or a rogue group that the White House had called the Plumbers, that they had set against us. So anyway, that was
that's really incredible, and you can see that plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. That this sort of operation, still infiltration operation, still goes on,
including some of the people who are going to Black Lives Matters demonstrations and systematically breaking windows, and many of them have been followed to where they're going, and some people have actually reported seeing them afterwards going into the police station, the nearest police station.
We'll come back to that, the current situation, Michael. But I'd like now to ask you, just for the benefit of everybody listening, your definition of revolutionary love.
Well, I don't know if I have a nice short one, but I tell you that it's like this. Revolutionary love is love that is directed towards every human being on the planet, that recognizes that every human being on the planet deserves a life of generosity and caring, and or what we call the caring society. And so revolutionary love is a love that is not just about one another. And this is, I mentioned, I think privately when we were talking before, that some people, in looking at the title, Revolutionary Love, immediately think, oh, this is some new age guy that is, but I'm not exactly new agey. It's the idea that we have and can care for the well-being of everyone on the planet. And that actually, that's not just because we have big hearts, but because we also have big enough heads to recognize that our well-being depends on the well-being of everyone else on the planet. And that consequently, it is extremely important for us to be involved in creating an economic and political system that enhances our capacity to care for everyone, rather than, as now, we live in an economic and political system that enhances our sense of, oh, it's too big for us, I can't do anything on the large scale. What I need to do is look out for myself and maybe a few people in my life that I care about, but any other level of caring is impossible and totally unrealistic, because everybody knows that everybody on the planet is just out for themselves. Now, I say that's not true, and that in fact, there are huge numbers of people who would love to care for other people and often do. We had an example of that in the 9/11, when the two World Trade buildings were brought down by airplanes allegedly driven by terrorists, and they those two there were lots of people stuck in there, and hundreds and hundreds of people rushed into those buildings to try to save the lives of others. They didn't know these people, and amongst them, 300 of the people who ran into into those buildings actually died in the course of doing that. So tremendous courage, caring for others that they don't know. Well, this kind of caring is also a factor in daily life. When you see somebody in deep trouble, most people respond by trying to help them in some way or other. I'm saying that the capacity to care for people that you don't really know is there in people, but there's a tremendous amount of propaganda that is, and it's not just from the media, it's also just from the daily reality of life in capitalist society. You're working in a workplace where all day long people are looking out for number one. Why? Because that's how it's structured. It's structured so that either yourself or at least your work group is in competition with other work groups in that same place, and definitely with other corporations. So you're there. The majority of working people's lives are spent in such workplaces, and at least until they've retired. And so over and over again, they come to feel that everybody's out for themselves, and hence that it's ridiculous to think that you could build a different kind of world. Consequently, revolutionary love is not about just making little reforms of the sort that, let's say, even Bernie Sanders or most progressives, when they're running for office, they have very good reforms. I was all in favor of Bernie, loved him, and etc. But actually, the world that we need is one in which the capitalist order is replaced by a different kind of society. And so revolutionary love is about how you build the steps along the way to make it there. And so I don't know if that helps
Fantastic.
Revolutionary love.
My next question is sort of not unrelated to it, but it's the connection with Dieter Doom at the Tamara Community. For those of you who don't know, who are listening, the Tamara Community is what they call a healing biotope. So it's an example of how society or community could be with the new kind of order and love and caring that Michael's talking about. And one of the founders is Dieter Doom. And then he also writes about the necessity of a revolution of love. And so I just wondered how you saw your own thinking in relation to his, because he was also an activist in the 1960s.
Yeah, no, I love him. And I spent a week with him and his community in Portugal. And it is beautiful, a beautiful kind of community. I had only one problem, which is that their actual actions were not well thought out. In other words, they're not in the cities. They're not in some place where there's a lot of other people to influence. They have a little place that's a utopian community, and it is the closest thing that I've ever seen to a community that is in fact utopian. But they're not too connected to the politics of Portugal or trying to change that, nor are they connected in any real way to social movements around the world. I hope, I know they want to be, and know that they have that aspiration, but the most of the people that I've met in that community, Tamara, it's called, they're very happy with the lives that they've been able to create in that community. And
well, I think that one of their major outreaches, as I'm sure you know, is the Defend the Sacred conference.
yeah,
And they have also had some interventions directly to do with the energy policy in Portugal. So, but I think you're right. I take your point, and about that they're not in the middle of a city and actively influencing things in the way that you might might wish. But no, that's very interesting.
they're great. No, they're great. They're wonderful people. I love him. I had great conversations with him. I am very much a fan of them.
Can we go on to what you call the Great Deprivation, the frustrated needs for community love, respect, and connection to a higher purpose? Because I think this is an important part of your thesis in the book. But perhaps you could expand on that a little bit and
Well,
its implications.
right. So, on the one hand, people live in a society in which there is so much indoctrination into the individualism and selfishness of the society. And the indoctrination, as I said, doesn't just come from somebody explicitly teaching it. It's that every institution is influenced by it. So, so that even in the left, so many people have internalized that value of looking out for number one, that it's very hard for them to, or for us, I should say, including myself, it's very hard for all of us to get beyond narrow conception of who we are, to go for the world that we really want to have. So the Great Deprivation is that at the same time, while we've absorbed all this, there's a part of everyone who wishes for a different kind of world, who would love to live in a different kind of world, but they never talk about it because they have accepted the notion that this is proof that they are being very unrealistic. And in fact, at an earlier stage in people's lives, many of them had a period like the 60s in which they wanted it and it didn't happen. And then they say, oh, well, this is it just shows that the world that we want is impossible, it'll never happen. So now I've got to get myself a good job and make as much money as I possibly can. And like that, and maybe I'll give a little bit of money to a progressive cause now and then. Wonderful, I'm glad that they do. But it's disappointing for them to then look out and see that everybody seems to be doing that same thing, looking out for number one, and hence not really engaged in building the kind of movement that could change this dynamic. So so you get these two things going in the same person: a desire for a different world, and then not having it and believing that it's impossible and becoming part of the way that everybody else is. And the deprivation is that they yearn for something different, but that yearning, many people suppress it. And in fact, not only suppress it, but very often will get angry at other people who are telling them that something different could happen, because having made accommodations to this reality, they feel like bad, that they're made to feel bad that they are in in a capitalist society and looking out for themselves. So they get very angry and suppress that part of them that wants something else. But that deprivation of what they really want, of their deepest need for a world based on love and kindness and generosity, then plays out in a whole variety of ways. One way is people look for some kind of alternative community that would provide that. in the 60s, we had a lot of those that were associated with the left. But after the left had been largely defeated, not totally, but largely defeated, many people went back to, okay, let's see, maybe my community will be a community of people in my law firm, or my medical practice, or in my union, or in my wherever. But they didn't really have that much to offer, because those alternatives were all based on the same kind of thinking of let's maximize. Even if you were a progressive lawyer or a progressive doctor, you eventually ended up trying to make your clinic better, but not looking at the larger picture and thinking that you could change anything in the larger world. So the deprivation then, it also takes the form for many people of who have never articulated this to themselves, but of either turning towards some religion or spiritual community, and there they found much more loving and caring in many of the right-wing communities than in the left-wing communities. I'll get back to that in a second for why. But they also turn to drugs, to alcohol, to every form of self-destructive behavior, because they're so frustrated by living in this kind of world, and particularly those who are simultaneously having bought the major self-justification of the capitalist inequality. So here I want to go into that for a second. The major justification for capitalist inequality is the belief that we live in a meritocracy, a society based on merit. And where you end up in the society is a function of how smart you are, how hard you've worked, or how much you deserve. Okay, now this idea that you're living in a meritocracy is taught not only every day in the media and in every movie, every television show, etc. It's the assumption that is there that is not that it's stated explicitly. It's always a part of the assumption. Yeah, I'm going to go out and make money here. I'm going to have this conquest of a sexual partner, conquest of some other thing that I can get that will prove that I'm okay. But the problem is that for most people, what they want, love, caring, respect, kindness, generosity, is not available to them. It's not because of their failings. It's because everybody has been conditioned in the ways that I've talked about to look out for number one and come to believe that everybody else is, and then think that they have no choice but to do that differently. So people end up often bringing home the ethos of capitalism into their family life, and it plays out in many ways. But one of them is that increasingly, and this is some of the research that I did with middle-income working people, thousands of them, that that in their consciousness, they have increasingly begun to see their relationships, their marriages even, as based on, well, amongst the people who are likely to fall for me in the short run, you're the one who's going to take care of more of my needs than anybody else. So this is a way of entering into relationships that, in fact, embodies the capitalist ethos, because
contractual, isn't it? Contractual.
Yeah. Now, not that everybody says this explicitly, but it's definitely part of the conscious and unconscious framing of who they are going to make a commitment to. I'll be with you as long as you are satisfying my needs better than anybody else that I can imagine would like me, or would want to fall for me and make it. So now what's the problem with that? Well, in the United States, it turns out that close to 45% of all marriages end in divorce. And so why? Because people are continually believing that somebody else that they'll find another person who will be satisfy more of their needs than the one that they're with right now. Now, I'm not putting anybody down here. I think it's almost impossible to grow up in this society without thinking instrumentally about human relationships. It's impossible because everyone around us is thinking instrumentally. Okay, from the start of when our parents were telling us, you've got to do well in school because that'll get you into the right high school, that'll get you into the right college, that'll get you into the right professional school, that will get you the best jobs or whatever. But it's all instrumental. It's not like go to school to learn something that's really valuable. And so
they're really fundamental structures, aren't they? Fundamental psychological and mental structures.
Exactly. What happens in families is that increasingly people are not sure whether they're in a family where their partner will stay with them, or whether at some point they might meet somebody that they think will satisfy more of their needs. And then as a rational maximizer of self-interest, they'll leave this relationship for another one. Again, I'm not putting anybody down here. I'm saying it's almost impossible to resist this way of thinking, but it does create tremendous insecurity in families, so that people, even those families that never do break up, many of the people no longer feel that the family is a secure place in which they're going to always be welcomed and cared for. And add on to that, that children even are increasingly seeing their parents through the same instrumental framework and saying, basically, what have you done for me recently, Dad or Mom? So in other words, you get kids who are ready, and and they get this from their watching television shows at age 3, 4, 5, 6, where that's the assumption is, of course, everybody's just out for themselves and trying to, I don't know if they have these kinds of shows in the UK, but in the United States, for kids, they have lots of animal shows for them. And the animals are beating each other up, and trying to be the more powerful one, the more something than the others. Right? Okay. Very few shows that show real collaboration between people, caring for each other. It's more like, and everybody, and the background of laughter and so forth is all about reinforcing the notion that the one who's valuable is the one who's most successful in this struggle. Okay,
yes.
So this creates tremendous insecurity, and the insecurity is because of a deprivation of love and caring and kindness. But it manifests in a whole variety of ways. So in the United States, we have the highest level of killing themselves.
Suicide.
Comes from of suicide comes from men in their between 50 and 60. Now, why are they killing themselves? Well, in most cases, it's that they can't see that they have had any success in this struggle. So, but it's extraordinary. Okay, but this is happening. It's been happening for the last 5 to 10 years. That's the highest level of suicide is with people in their, men in their, there's men, okay, not women who are kept out of the workplace because they're not so much, or that are screwed over in the workplace. Actually, it's white men, not so much black men. Why? Why the difference? Because black men and women already know that the thing is somewhat fixed against them, whereas white men are being told all the time, hey, it's a free marketplace. You can make it if you really try. You got nothing, everything's going for you. You're white, you're a man. You can do anything. Well, of course, all that obscures the class structure of the world, the distribution, the unequal distribution of education, and hence of income, and the fantasy that anybody can make it has been disproved by studies, some of which were published in our New York Times just 10 or 11 years ago, that showed that the amount of upward class mobility from the lower incomes to higher incomes is about 3%. It's like a tiny percentage of the
Yes,
workforce that's able to make any significant change in their situation.
Michael, can I go on to another theme, because you've spoken very fully about this one, and this is the important point that you make, that inner change, sort of transformation of consciousness, which a lot of people talk about, is not enough if it is not wedded to political engagement, which of course is your definition of revolutionary love, that you have to be doing both of these things. But could you expand? I think there are two real points here. One is that the spiritually inclined people just don't get involved in politics, and then the political people don't get involved in spirituality, and they have a problem with it. And so you've got an issue at both ends of the spectrum, if you like. Could you expand on that a little?
Well, just that, I mean, it's a terrible bifurcation that exists, that, and from the standpoint now of people who are progressive, often they have bought into a narrow conception of human needs that basically says that human beings need their material well-being. And so they formulate their politics in a very narrow, I'd say, materialist, reductionist way. And I think you saw this with, now I'm forgetting his name, but the guy who just lost the race in the UK for Prime Minister, the Labour Party.
Corbyn.
What?
Jeremy Corbyn, you mean, as opposed
Corbyn.
to
So this with Corbyn, and you saw this with Bernie Sanders in the United States. Both, in my view, wonderful people. Both, in my view, people who would have made the UK and the United States much better place. But nevertheless, having a narrow enough view that they couldn't understand that there are other human needs besides material security. Respect, for example, right? Corbyn, towards the Jewish world, was disrespectful, extremely disrespectful, in it was outrageous that people called him an anti-Semite. He certainly wasn't that. Or that they said that anti-Semitism was flourishing in the Labour Party. That was just a total lie. But it was true that he didn't listen when people were saying that there's a problem here, that the way you're talking doesn't acknowledge some of our fears, okay? People need to feel respected and cared for, and their fears even addressed, at least, in a respectful and caring way. In the United States, with Bernie was wonderful. I loved him. You know, he's a great person. But he couldn't speak to the heart. He was always speaking to the mind. Now, I'm all for the mind, okay? I have 2 PhDs. I love the mind, okay? You know, so, but you have to recognize, what I used my mind to do was to learn what was going on with other people. And what I learned was that people deeply need to feel affirmed, particularly in a capitalist society where the marketplace doesn't affirm them, okay? Where, you know, 50% of the population is in a situation where they're highly in debt and struggling to make it just to survive financially. People need to hear a voice of love and compassion and kindness and generosity, and they don't hear it by and large from the left. And I don't know if anything like this happens in the UK, but here in the United States, when the left lost in 2016 with not very much of a left person, Hillary Clinton, running, but nevertheless, when Hillary Clinton was seen as the spokesperson of the liberal world, a liberal and progressive world. Why? Because most liberals and progressives voted for her. Okay, they didn't create another party. They were in the Democratic Party, and once she had won the nomination, they supported her. So for people, ordinary people who are not into politics all the time, they assume that who is speaking for the left? Hillary Clinton. So what did Hillary Clinton say? Just a few months before the election, she says, well, those people who are, half of those people who are for Trump are a basket of deplorables. Okay, now this thing was picked up by the right, and every right-wing radio station, every right wing was playing it over and over and over again. What they think of you, they think of you as deplorable. And how I know this is because in research that we did after the election and spoke to lots of people, the most frequent point that they brought up was some version of this: I am not a deplorable. Okay,
Indeed, yeah.
when they're explaining how they voted. Now, on the other hand, if you spoke to anybody in the liberal and progressive world, they would and asked, well, how come you lost in 2016? The answer most frequently given, and this is not, I'm not talking about the hardcore activists, I'm talking about the large circle of people who felt terribly disappointed that that Hillary didn't win. That's tens of millions of people. And you ask them, and I, again, random choices of who to listen to in that community, we got the same answer. Why did you lose in 2016? Oh, that's easy. Because Americans are racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, or just plain stupid. Now, this is the message that they heard. They heard from all of us, or almost all of us. Why we lost? Because you are stupid, because you are racist or sexist or homophobic. This is a very bad plan for how you're going to win over people who are not yet with you.
Exactly. So, and you write in one part, you were talking to some people about this, and one of them said, well, we know that Trump is a jerk, but at least he's our jerk.
Exactly. In other words, that in some way, just, I mean, look, here you have this narcissist and, you know, really sicko guy who's the president now, but he is so desperate for approval and for reaffirmation that many people who voted for him felt like, okay, this guy is not going to lord it over me. This guy is like me. He's just like me. He's not sure of himself, feels bad about himself, just like I do. He's desperate for having people to affirm him, and you know, so am I. I'm desperate for affirmation. So I can feel what he is. He's like me. I'm saying this is how many people saw him who voted for him. Was okay. For Hillary, I'm a deplorable. For him, I'm just like him. So, thinking in these terms about how do you reach people who are not feeling good about themselves, and so this gets back to something I was going to say a second ago about the right-wing churches. The right-wing churches in the United States have a very powerful message. So when people come there, they hear this: you are not at fault for the things that aren't working in your life. Now, whereas the liberal and progressive world says, you're definitely at fault. You live in a meritocracy. You know, wherever you are, you know, there's something wrong with you. You haven't been successful. At least that's what they hear. Okay. What they hear in the churches in the right-wing churches is, you're not to blame. This is a societal condition, not you. But then the right goes on to say, and you know who is to blame? The racists, the blacks, the women, the particularly feminist women, the homosexuals, the trans people, and the list goes on. Jews, Muslims, immigrants. They're all, and this is the formula that I'm talking about is universal in every capitalist society or oppressive society. This is what the right uses. It relieves self-blaming by transferring the blaming onto the demeaned other of that society. In the first half of the 20th century, the main demeaned other in continental Europe, but also in the UK to some extent, were the Jews. The Jews were blamed for everything, and that was subtext that made so many people join into fascist movements to get rid of the Jews. In the United States, we have African Americans and Native Americans as first runners up of who gets blamed, but then now feminists and liberals and progressives, and so it's a long list of people who get blamed for what's not happening in their lives. And it's reassuring to people because it relieves their self-blaming. The left needs to put on its flag, "You're not to blame," but the blame is the system, the social system that is a system of selfishness and materialism. So,
absolutely. I just want to get on to your kind of positive agenda, as it were, about your main strategies for building a love and justice movement and a caring society, and moving from a system based on fear and domination to love and generosity. And in particular, perhaps you could say something about your Ezra Amendment that you're proposing.
Yes.
That's sort of central.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, the ESRA. So first of all, I'll say the number one first step in changing our society, and I would say in changing the Labour Party in the UK and so forth, is to change the left. The left has to move beyond an assumption that what people only want, the most important thing, is the material circumstances. To also recognize that people have needs for recognition, for being cared for, and that a left needs to embody that in its practices. I've been active in left organizations since 1964. I've almost never felt like people in those organizations were trying to show each other that they cared for them. They cared for them, even for the other people in their movements. They were much more concerned about winning an argument than they were concerned with making people feel like, hey, we really care about you, our fellow, our comrades in this movement. We care about you. So that after a meeting, people would just go home. There would never be a call to, okay, now introduce yourself to other people, get to know them, make friends with them, because we want this to be a place where people will feel affirmed, okay? Instead, very often, it was one ego against another during the meeting, and then nobody stays, and very little in the way of building an ongoing affirming community. There were sometimes little communities that did that by attacking all the other left communities, right? So, okay, we're in this socialist organization and we're attacking the other socialist organizations. And but there was no ethos, and there still is no ethos of affirmation of people, of caring for people of our own, much less giving the feel to people who are not yet with us that this is a place where you can feel safe and cared for. Come to us and we will be examples of the kind of world we want. So changing the left, trying to teach them a new way of empathizing with others who are not yet with us and speaking in an empathic way is step number one. And we do a training that Tikkun and the organization that we have called the Network of Spiritual Progressives does a training, in a 6-week training on Zoom. So you don't have to be here. You can be any place in the world. And we do have people come. We have somebody in the current training from New Zealand and somebody from Germany, a whole bunch of people from Germany and so forth. It's it trains you in how to use what we call prophetic empathy. Empathy is affirming other people's other feelings. Prophetic empathy is also helping people see what needs to be challenged in the structures of capitalist society, and how to talk about that in a way that doesn't make people feel put down or talked down to. So that's step number one. Step number two is if we can change the culture of the left, then we need to also simultaneously be putting forward visions of the world we want. And we have two main ones that we're talking about. They're in my book, Revolutionary Love, which I hope everybody in the UK gets. And you can get it by either through Amazon or through, oh yeah, there it is, or through ordering it from us at tikkun.org/buy Rev Love, B-U-Y, buy Rev Love. Or get your local bookstore to order it. It's published by the University of California Press. The next step are specific programs that we have, and I'm just mentioning two, but we have a whole detailed set of plans that you can read about in the book of what to do. But to do things like how we affirm working people, how we affirm people who are not with us yet, but I'll just go to the two big ones that, number one, a global Marshall Plan. We want to redistribute wealth in the world such that we and the advanced industrial countries take care of and end this extreme suffering due to poverty that faces people in the underdeveloped or the world that has been underdeveloped in part by decisions of the capitalist class in the United States, UK, France, and a few other advanced industrial countries. Okay, so the Global Marshall Plan is one such, and we have it's not just giving money away; it's a whole detailed plan about what to do. The second one is called the Environmental and Social Responsibility Amendment to the Constitution, to the U.S. Constitution, because I understand you guys don't have a constitution in Britain, right? That's a little problem, but there are probably ways you could do this kind of thing there too. So the first part is about getting money out of politics and prohibiting money in any form from influencing the outcome of elections. The second one is requiring every corporation with incomes above $50 million a year, I don't know how to say that in pounds, but any large corporation must get a new corporate charter once every 5 years. And that new corporate charter will only be granted to those who can prove to a jury of ordinary citizens that they have a satisfactory history of environmental and social responsibility. Now, and that jury of ordinary citizens will receive testimony from people all over the world who have been affected or impacted either directly or indirectly by the actions of that corporation. So this gives a tremendous incentive for corporations to move in a different direction than simply maximizing their money, because they'll lose their corporate's charter and hence not be able to function unless they actually can prove that to people who are just listening to the testimony, their own testimony, of course, but the testimony, the corporation's testimony, but also the testimony of people all around the world who've been affected by that corporation. So it gives a tremendous, and we don't have the view that everybody in corporations is evil. On the contrary, we think many of the people in the corporations, at least at the lower levels, really would love to see their corporation doing more good in the world. Only they know that that they're going to be told, hey, what does that have to do with maximizing the bottom line? So the ESRA is a step in the direction of giving a tool to people in those corporations who can then go to their corporate leadership and say, you know what, you're going to lose your corporate charter very soon unless you can act in a more environmentally responsible and socially responsible way. And of course, we define this in the book in detail of some of what those things are that are looked upon. It also then, the next part of it also requires that that fossil fuels is banned by 2040, and that those corporations that are involved in either in fuel or in utilities of any sort, or in transportation, get taken over in the public sphere and run by environmentalists. And so it's not like saying, okay, we're going to have an election. We're going to let the major environmental corporations, and similarly with running the corporations, the major corporations will be required to have on their board a certain percentage of environmentalists who are shaping some of the policies of corporations. This is in short, but the overall thing, and I'll just stop here. Sorry about that call, but I'm not going to answer it. The overall theme is that we need a new bottom line. A new bottom line. Today, the bottom line is that we see institutions, our economic system, our corporations, our government policies, all these institutions are judged efficient, rational, and productive to the extent that they maximize money and power. We say we need a new bottom line. And this is sort of the unifying thing that we think can bring together all the different parts of the left, because all of them, I think, would agree with this new bottom line. That we need a new bottom line that says that institutions should be judged efficient, productive, rational, to the extent that they maximize love, caring, kindness, and generosity, to the extent that they maximize environmental sensitivity and social justice, to the extent that they make it bring out in people their capacities that, I'm sorry. Hang up on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, to the extent that they to the extent that they maximize love and kindness, ethical and environmental sensitivity, and enhance our capacity to respond to other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, rather than simply as, what can I get from you? What have you done for me? So.
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed, Michael. Sorry about the. I want to come. I'd like to keep the one question about your view on the current riots and racism and injustice. I'd like to keep that for the next part. So thank you very much indeed for what you told us so far. Natalie Tobit has one written down here saying, what are Rabbi Lerner's perspectives on ways that we might merge spirituality with practical activism towards social change? I think you've talked a little bit about this, Michael, but Natalie would like to know a bit more, I think.
Well, number one, there's this new bottom line, and unfortunately, I didn't add all parts of it. I started to say that institutions get judged efficient, rational, and productive to the extent they maximize love and caring, kindness and generosity, ethical and environmental sensitivity, enhance our capacity to respond to other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, and here's the part that I don't think I said, and enhance our capacity to all of our capacities to look at the earth and the universe, not primarily from the standpoint of what it can do for us, namely, can we turn something here into a commodity and sell it, but rather to look at it with awe and wonder and radical amazement. So that is an opening to the question of what a progressive movement should do, which is that we should also have time to affirm not only the beauty in each other, but also the mystery of life itself and the magnificence of the universe that we live in and the preciousness of our planet Earth, and to incorporate that into our meetings so that we have some time in each meeting which is taken up with just that affirmation, not just saying it, but doing something that dedicates time to either meditation or singing or some way of affirming our love for the earth and our love for the universe. And so that element that is so popular in churches ought to be also popular in what liberal and progressive organizations do. Now, I don't mean, I want to avoid any sense that we're out to convert people to any specific religion or spiritual tradition. That is not the task of a network for spiritual progressives. But what is the task is to affirm these other aspects of human needs, to affirm the need for love and caring, to affirm the need for respect, to affirm the need for treating other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, and affirm our connection to the earth, And those things can be part of music. They can be part of what a political meeting is like. It can be what political candidates for office do when they're up there speaking. That is to bring in this other dimension of reality. Now that so if you felt like when you were going to a meeting of a political organization that there was also this other element there of a moment in which we're affirming those values, and we're affirming them not just by saying them, but by being them in some way, that would make a huge difference, I believe.
Before we wrap up, I'd like to come to this issue that I raised just before the break, about the racism and injustice, and what's happening in the US, and how this can be tackled not much more radically than simply suppressing the symptoms, which is quite tempting. So what's your view? You have 2 or 3 pages in your book with specific proposals in this respect. So maybe you just like to speak to that a bit.
And if people want to go to the website tikkun.org, you'll and you see on the top, almost the top of that website, there's an article by me on how to overcome racism in the society, and it involves many different steps. It's not one shot takes it all. It certainly involves eliminating the poverty that is facing people, but like many other things, it also includes anti-racism, anti-sexism, say information about all of these societal diseases that we have: racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, hatred of immigrants, etc., as required for every grade from 4th grade on through college, on through graduate school. At every grade level, courses in that are required for everybody coming into the society, so that's reinforced there dramatically on the level of understanding what racism is, or sexism, or xenophobia, or Islamophobia, or anti-Semitism, etc. And couple that with also a guaranteed annual income for people who don't have, and there are many other specifics there. So if you want to read it, go to tikkun.org and look for my article. It's almost on the top it's close to the top. It's a featured article. Read that article. You can read other people. We have a lot of people, a lot of articles there with different people and different perspectives on how to deal with racism. But it's a great moment to deal with it. And what I'm saying is the smartest people are saying, hey, it's not enough to deal with the level of police brutality. We also have to deal with the structures of the society that reinforce racism. And that's what my piece is about, is what are those structures and what needs to be changed. But in the end, and this is where my message differs from many in the liberal and progressive world, I ask, how are we going to get there? And we're not going to get there until we change the way we talk to ordinary people, the way we think about other people. Because today, if you in the United States, if you go to a left rally, you'll hear the left talking about how everybody has to reject and overcome their special white skin privilege, and that they are having all these great privileges that blacks don't have, and they should be ashamed of themselves. And that's what they do. The left does so much shaming and blaming. And guess what? Well, I've learned through my 55 years as a therapist. Blaming does not work. Shaming is not a good strategy. It's a strategy that leads people to say, "Phooey, I don't want to hear anything else you say. You don't like me. You don't respect me. You think I'm a bad person. I don't want to hear anything else you have to say." And even if they hear what else they say, okay, I agree with you and everything else. But when it comes to the ballot box, they don't vote for you because they feel that your organization, your political movement, your political party, whatever, is filled with people who hate them. Okay, hate them. That's what they feel. So when you turn around and say and talk to people about their white skin privilege, that'll work with the top 20% of income earners. There's some legitimacy. But when you talk to poor people who are struggling for a living, and they're white, that what's the privilege they have? Well, you're not getting shot in the street like black people are. That's not a privilege. That's just, it's like saying you have a privilege to have air to breathe. No, that's not a privilege. That is a right that people should have. But they're not privileged by virtue of that. They're a little safer by virtue of that, but they're not. That's not a privilege. It's not something that they can lure other people and say, look what I have that you don't have. But when you focus people's attention on how much better they are off than somebody less than them, that is a bad strategy. And the strategy of the left has to be to turn people's attention towards the top 20%, really the top 10%, really the top 1%, really the top 1/10 of 1%. Okay, in the United States, three ultra billionaires own more wealth than the 50%, the lowest 50% of income earners. Okay, I'm talking about 50% of income earners. That's like 150 million people, and the three people own more wealth than all of them. Okay, so you can't turn around and make them bad, that just because they're white. The truth of the matter is, and I've spoken to many people who hear this message from the left, and they say, I hate it. I hate a left that talks that way about me. They don't know anything about my life. I'm struggling in my life. I barely have enough. I barely earn enough money to put the food on the table for my kids. When they're talking to me about my white skin privilege, forget it. It's the opposite of the reality that I actually live. Now you might say, oh, well, but they didn't look at this, that, or the other thing. Yeah, but anybody can do this. You can always find somebody who's worse off than you and say you're better than them. So, people in the third world can turn to the poor people in the United States and the UK and say, you poor people have a lot more privilege than we who are living in far worse conditions than you are. Okay, it's the wrong strategy. It's a strategy that aligns people with the ruling elites. What we have to do is to help people see that their interest is in overcoming racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and that their interests are that their lives would be a lot better off if those kinds of things were eliminated rather than pandered to.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think that one of the important points, and just in beginning to wind things up, that you've made is that we who agree with what you've been talking about tonight, we need to start talking about this. We need to start sharing these ideas with our friends. We need to bring the vocabulary in, because until you bring the vocabulary in and really start talking about it and making it, as Charles Eisenstein said, one of his books was The Beautiful World That We Know in Our Hearts Is Possible. And we do know in our hearts it's possible. Everybody, as you said, really wants this new kind of world, but we don't think it's possible. If we don't try it and talk about it and put it on the agenda, then of course we're doing ourselves.
Every major change that's happened in the last years, under the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay, lesbian and gay movement, the ending of apartheid in South Africa, every one of those movements faced in the first 20 or 30 years of their existence, a common sense response from everybody else saying, it'll never happen. You should narrow your demands. Don't talk too idealistically. The truth of the matter is, you never know what is possible until you engage your life in struggling for what is desirable. So instead of narrowing your focus to something that seems realistic, go for the vision of the world that is best for you. I believe that if you read Rev, you'll agree with me that the best world is one where there's a new bottom in every sphere. People are treating each other as embodiments of the sacred and treating the earth, responding to the earth with awe and wonder and radical amazement at the grandeur and mystery of this universe. But that the caring society, caring for each other, caring for the earth. These are words that people grasp right away, but they think it's impossible. And you have to say, is again what I just said, you never know what is possible until you struggle for what is desirable. So don't waste your life fighting for something which when you win it, you haven't won very much. Spend your whatever resources you have, whatever financial resources you have, whatever energy you have, give it into fighting for the highest vision of the good. And you can get people a copy of Revolutionary Love, get people to read the website, join our network of spiritual progressives. That's on the web at spiritualprogressives.org. Do our training. If you say, I don't know how to do this, join the training. The training is at spiritualprogressives.org/training. The current training is already 3 weeks in, so you can't get into it right away. But the next training that'll come along, sign up for it. Sign up so that you can get the information at spiritualprogressives.org/training. And then just get your name and email down there so that we can get back to you and tell you when the next training is and how to get to be part of it. So go for your highest vision of the good. Don't waste your life spending it fighting for something that somebody has told you is the only thing that's realistic.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Can I suggest everybody, just so we also get a bit of an idea, just put into the chat your main takeaway from this evening. It'd be interesting to see that. And personally, I think just what you said about striving for what is desirable, and the way that I put it is that that one of the great teachers I follow is Peter Dunoff, Ben Saduno, and he's a prophet of a culture of love and wisdom. And I use that as a compass direction. I ask myself, is what I'm doing a step towards a culture of love and wisdom? And if the answer is yes, then okay, that's fine. But if it's no, then at least you've got this compass direction that even if we don't get there, then we know we're going in the right direction. So we've got people coming out, raise your expectations, believe in my highest vision of the good. More coming in. Paulson's having a big vision for the world, myself. Make the impossible dream a reality. Practical revolutionary love. Strive for the most loving world. So it sounds like you've got your message through, Michael.
Good. So
yeah.
all I'm saying is send me your emails so I can be in more contact with you. RABBILERNER.TIKKUN@gmail.com.
Yeah, we've sent that out. So just a couple more before we close. Stay true to what I know deep in my heart. The love is the new center of power. Spiritual and socio-political integrated by love. Recognize each one is responsible for everyone and everything in the world. We're totally connected. Love and respect for everyone is the missing ingredient in the politics of the left. So terrific. Well, Michael, thank you very much for your passionate and inspiring talk and explanations this evening. I think we've had a sort of rousing encouragement to really believe that something else is possible, another world is possible, and to work towards that. And I thank you and salute you for all the work that you've done over the last 55 years, and long may it continue. And let's all get together and be part of what you call the love and justice movement. And so I'm going to bring the candle up again, and I will send it out to love and justice for personal and collective transformation and realizing the good of the whole. So here is the light going out.